Welcome, everyone, to another edition of Standalone, where we really dive into leadership. You know, the whole premise of standing alone is to be able to think above the noise of the world, but then not to isolate yourself, to understand that we function as teams, that we function as communities, and that we do need each other. So when I think about, interviewing and bringing guests to our community, I know you guys are a lot of high achievers. How do the better get even better? I believe you accelerate your growth through listening to the wisdom of other people that have walked where you're looking to go. And today we have a powerhouse in our presence. What do Pepsi, Gatorade, Snapple, Dr. Pepper, Essentia have all in common? We are in the presence of the past CEO of Essentia Water, 2 decades of serving as a CEO for some of behemoths of companies. When you talk about the water industry, you're talking about over $20 billion globally, over $200 billion. So that's a lot for you to be in charge of. And so, Scott Miller, we are so honored and privileged to have you in our presence today. You just completed writing a book called The Summit Mindset. We want to talk about this today. What does that mean? How does this pertain to us being successful in business and in life? But then I also want to dive into your current adventure that you're in right now, because business has to be an adventure. You have a company that you've now started, Nestle. So I want to talk about that too, and how you transitioned to opening and running your own company now. I just completed reading your book. I want to say thank you, because whenever someone takes the time to distill their knowledge, writing a book is not simple, right? You have to be able to take all the things that you've experienced, then put it into a work of art. So I just want to say thank you for doing that. And I want to start off by asking, why did you use that analogy of a summit mindset? I thought it was very genius, but I wanted to ask you specifically to kick us off as your first question today.
That's awesome. Well, listen, it's first an honor to be here with you today on Standalone. I appreciate your time and taking the time to read the book. That's just fabulous. So really, writing the book and the summit mindset, I'm a runner, and I really believe that, running the backcountry in the mountains, the climate's always changing, and you get fogged in, you get snowed in, and that's really life in business. No business is a straight line, and life isn't a straight line for any of us. And as you said, we're all on this journey together. And, the summit mindset is a mindset that that adversity comes in life. And when you set good fundamentals in business and in your personal life, you can come through the other side of that adversity with growth, a learner's mindset, and even better. So I think it's a really, really important title, and it really serves both, the organizations and individuals.
Yeah, I have he's become a good friend. He's an ex-Navy SEAL, and he's climbed Mount Everest. And before I spoke to you today, I asked him, what would you say are the 3 most difficult things that you went and encountered when you were climbing? And he talked about like the skills that we kind of train for, which is climbing. But one of the things that he mentioned was patience. They didn't really train enough for the skill of patience. And as I was reading your book, Scott, one of the things that stood out to me, it's almost a really great book on how to deal with crisis management. And as a CEO, I can't think of something that you have to get in front of more than that. What would you say in your, in all of your, working with all these successful companies? What would you say is the role of crisis management to be a successful CEO, especially in today's world where you can't hide anymore? You got to get in front of the crisis. You said a great line here. I believe it was something along the lines of, a crisis is not a time to turtle up. What do you mean by that? And explain.
Yeah, it's a great, great question, Sabrina. I think that crisis is part of life in business, and it's about communication being the easiest thing, but the hardest thing, right? It's that common sense isn't that common, right? Mm-hmm. So having the knowledge to know that crisis has happened in business and keeping your cadence on communication really high in good times. So when crisis comes, your communication, your ability to pivot and solution drive in that moment is really good, because an organization has to create good habits. Organizations have good habits and bad habits, and you got to close the gap on those bad habits and make your good habits part of your daily behavior. And I believe it's the same thing with individuals. That's why when you look at the Summit Mindset, we really wanted to create a hybrid book that organizations can learn from it, but so can people individually. And I think what happens in life is, we know colleagues and friends and families, when crisis comes, often people crumble. When you have a good foundation, you have good pillars in your life, you understand that's part of living and it's part of business, and you work through that because you have really sound fundamentals. And I think that's really, really important. A lot of the businesses that I've gone into, it's been turnaround work. So filled with great people, but a very fragmented business, often a lot of dysfunction going on, often a lot of silos. And how you create that message of communication and behavior is mission critical to success and mission critical to adversity.
So here's a question for you, because today I feel like we are more individualistic than ever before. And when you're operating from a company point of view, and even life, you do have to understand the role of teams, teamwork. I know you talk so much about communication, but how do you still give someone the feeling of, I am an individual, I have my own thoughts, I have my own viewpoints, but then still rally around a greater mission than just yourself? How do you marry those two concepts together?
Yeah, excellent question. I believe first we all have to know what our personal North Star is, and a
Yeah.
business has to have a North Star. What are they after? What are they going after? I think the other important thing is that communicating to your organization that we all have a valuable voice, that we're all important. And that's not a plaque on a wall about culture. It's about living that culture every day. That I want to listen to Sabrina. I want to listen to Scott. I want to hear their valuable voice. That doesn't mean that that voice is always going to be the voice we move forward with. But when people feel their voice is heard, they're empowered to make a difference. And that's what galvanizes a team. So at Nestle today, a small business, it's only a year old with 20 employees, we set our North Star to be the #1 enhanced still water beverage in North America. We set our pillars, a we culture, a valuable voice, the grit of the underdog, a North Star to be #1 in our category, and a community to serve everyone with a mouth. So we know where we're going. We know what we want to do. And look, business and life are very similar. It's an inside out job. You have to be able to look inward and reflect at what you stink at in a business, recalibrate. And we need to do that as individuals. And that's not a bad thing. People think having a weak point is really bad in business. No, it's understanding your vulnerability. And as I spoke earlier, it's about closing the gaps, talking about it together, and getting better together as one team. I think often in businesses, you hear about a culture, and I always say, I never want culture to be a plaque on the wall. I want it to be a culture that we live and breathe, and it's a valuable asset to us every day, but it's always evolving. Some days it goes backwards, some days it goes forwards, but we always have progress in mind.
Yeah, before it used to be in business, people would always say, like, oh, we have a mission statement. And that was a popular thing, and it was a sentence. And now people are like, oh, this is our culture. And, that becomes a paragraph of what you are. And then what it really is, though, and what I've come to understand about business and just growing teams and evolving teams over 20 years in a different industry, is that it is a feeling. And in business, it gets really hard to talk about these feeling things, but then we have to create results out of it also. And I think one of the things that I wanted to ask you about is this word that floats around in the business world right now, which is authenticity. And you said something in the beginning where you talked about, in communication, you have to be communicating regularly so that when a crisis happens, it doesn't become something that feels inauthentic to the people now. Because now they're looking at you as a leader and saying, well, where were you before? Why
Yeah.
are you now getting on top of this and then talking to us? So when you are I love what you talk about doing the reps. And you said something really great in your book. You said, accumulate mileage and build endurance before sharpening with speed. And I think a lot of people have to sit down and really digest what this means, because in business today, a lot of people are like, just tell me what to do. And then they want these results, Scott, immediately. And when you're in business for a long period of time, there's this great importance in the beginning about just doing the reps, just do the work. Can you speak to this in your wisdom in business and how it's so incredibly important today for people to learn the patience of not expecting the results so fast right away?
Yeah, it's mission critical. I believe doing the reps is something we do in business forever. It's a no finish line mentality. It's the ability
Yeah.
to practice like you play every day. And it's about, as I spoke earlier, it's about creating habits and behaviors, right? If I have communication with you and I every day, you expect that from me. And then in return, I expect that from you. When crisis and adversity hits, we have such great communication that we problem solve together. We never point fingers. Organizations that don't communicate are finger pointers. Organizations that communicate are problem solvers. And that's what doing the reps is, right? It's a no finish line mentality. It's never done. We always have to believe we never stop evolving. We always have to believe that we recalibrate. In my experience in life, in business, my greatest learnings have come through struggle, not in the winner's circle. In the winner's circle, the job is done. It's about the climb. It's like you talk to your friend about climbing Everest. It's the patience. It's playing the long game. And in the long game, continuing to recalibrate, to look inward, to say how we can get better. Even in our best meetings in a little company like Nestle today, when we have a great meeting, afterwards we say, what do we miss? Where can we get better? Look, we all know what we're good at, and we don't like to talk about what we stink at. We don't like to look inward. And I think when a business does that really well, you become the greatest competitor. You also, through time, through that cadence and communication, you pick up speed because your habits are getting better, right? Your habits are getting better. Think of anything in our lives that you do on a regular basis. It just becomes repetition. That's why practice like you play, doing the reps to me never ends.
I love this. Forgive me, I'm coming off of a cold, so my throat's a little itchy here, but one of the things that you really talk about when you're going over about just building the right teams and the importance of communication. How did you go from being the CEO of Essentia, which is such a powerful company, then you get it successfully run and operated so that it can be acquired by Nestle. Now you're starting another team, and it's a smaller group, I would assume. How do you go from being a CEO of such a large company to now I'm building this up? When a lot of CEOs, sometimes they deal with massive power issues and ego issues. How did you quiet that? Or do you struggle with it? When your team at Nestle is doing things and they don't really understand the experience that you have, how do you come to them today as, Scott Miller, the CEO of Nestle, to get this company to be a behemoth?
It's a wonderful question. I think it's a really important question for individuals. I think the most important for us as individuals is to know what you're in pursuit of in life. And I've always been in pursuit of doing more. And what sets my soul on fire is being in pursuit. What makes me feel good is being in pursuit. I've been an operating CEO of companies for 20 years. I've, been blessed and humbly grateful to achieve great things there. And now I said it's time for me to take a moonshot and be in pursuit of building my own brand, building my own business with a team, building my own culture from brick by brick, first brick at a time. And I think what's important for individuals is to ask ourselves, what are we in pursuit of? What's important in life? What are we going after? What is our personal North Star? So for me, this is a wonderful journey, putting a team together today where in 1 year, we're 22 people, building a culture, talking about our culture. We start our town halls. We talk about our culture. We talk about our pillars. In our weekly meetings, we talk about what we can get better at. And we're building a brand that we think we can have real meaningful impact to consumers. We're creating something that's an enhanced still water beverage with a function. So I think it's not about ego. It's about, we all have egos, and it's about understanding what sets your soul on fire. Like, what gets you up in the morning? What makes you go? How many folks have we met in our life, family members, friends, colleagues? They get to a point in their life and they just lost their mojo. And you ask them what makes you happy, and they almost actually can't even define what makes them happy. And
Right.
that's super sad. I read about that in the Summit Mindset. And happiness, unfortunately, in our society, it's like, the big car, the big house, the big title. Happiness to me is this: having a conversation with you, an intelligent conversation where you're really well prepared. You read the book. We're talking about things because we want to help people. And to me, it's about being a servant leader of helping people and building things. And quite frankly, they don't have to be big things. They just have to be things that we personally feel help us be in pursuit of life.
Yeah. And, what's really important too, when I created this concept of standalone, it was really about courage for me because, there's things that you see in business and there's stuff that you just intuitively know, like, are we going down the right path right now? And then there's these moments where you're like, no, we need to shift direction. And then just building up that discernment to know this is the right move. I made a mistake. Okay, let's get back on track. What would you say? I love when you give, the 10 points underneath courage, but then towards the bottom, at number 8, 9, and 10. And that's why, everyone get the book and read it because there's just way too much that we're not going to cover it all today. But a lot of people struggle with this, Scott, when you say don't avoid challenges, but then you say reduce stress, and then you really just fill that together. That how do you do that is you have to ask for help.
You
You
have,
have to have the courage to ask for help. So what role was that, asking for help? How did that help you to be a successful leader?
well, I think it's about, I love courage because I think courage is often confusing. People think of courage like, I have to be big, brave, and strong. We all have courage, and courage comes to us in our life at some point through some type of adversity. We all deal with the need at life to have an intersection where you need courage. I think it came through me. Every decade of my life, I've had personal adversity. I've had health issues. I've had things go wrong. This summer had a terrible experience where the driver who was driving me had a terrible experience and, had a heart attack at the wheel. That took incredible courage, right? And as I sat on the curb, and unfortunately he was a friend and he didn't make it, I asked myself a really important question. Am I living my life with courage? And am I in pursuit of the things that matter? If I hadn't have made it that night, if that car would have rolled over and I hadn't have made it. And it's that intersection we all have in life. We all have these moments. We can't sleepwalk through them. We have to understand, are we doing things in our life that matter? Are we having courage? What happens to most folks is they conform in life. They play small because they're put in a box, or their friends or their colleagues or family says, you can't do that. Why would you do that? I wrote a book for the first time. People tell me you're crazy to write a book. In the first week, it became an Amazon bestsellers list. I've never conformed to what the world tells me to do. I've always had the courage through adversity and learning to live my life, to be in pursuit of the best life I can be. And that doesn't mean it's perfect, because it's not. It's just living. But in those moments where things go wrong, I think there are intersections to say, how are we living? Sabrina started her podcast. She's doing something different. That's awesome. How are we living? And I think courage comes to us all. And then it's about, we don't step back enough. We don't pause during our day. Take a 5-minute walk. What everyone thinks is everything has to be grandiose. It's the simple habits that bring us peace.
Yeah. As a CEO, have you ever, I do this a lot now. In the beginning, I just couldn't afford to travel. I was just working so hard to get ahead. And that was where I was doing my reps. But then one of the gifts that I was able to give myself was just the gift of travel, because you meet other cultures, you see how other people, live, then you can come back to your business and apply a more 360-degree approach. Instead of I'm a fan of America. I was born in Canada, but I'm an American citizen now. But sometimes in America, we just are going so hard, so fast, and we're just running into a wall. And we need a moment to pause, And when you talk about just all these different companies, like you gave great examples in your book about Kodak, BlackBerry, Better.com, Tylenol, and you show, some of these guys just really miss the beat.
Totally.
Yeah. And then some people get ahead, right? You talk about Howard Schultz, how he's still battling with stuff. And, how do we apply this to our lives so that we can, and I want you to dig into that North Star compass. And for me, one of the things that I do to have like a navigational sense is I will stop using an app and I will just, Italy is my go-to place. And if you're ever in Italy, have you been there?
Yes.
Yeah, if you're walking around, it's not always a block system, but if you find like a monument or something that you're familiar with, then you can find your bearings. And a lot of people don't have bearings or they don't have something like a North Star. Can you explain this concept to people? Because I think this is incredibly important. And then how that ties into faith, and your relationship to something larger than yourself to help guide you along the way.
Yeah, I love all your questions. They're outstanding. Well, I think a North Star in anyone's life is really, really important to know. Start to know, drop your anchor on who you are and what do you want to do. My North Star, my personal North Star is just to be the best human I can be. And that doesn't mean perfect. That means every day, wake up, try to be a little better than yesterday, look inward and ask myself how I'm doing. I talk about pillars in the Summit Mindset. My pillars in my life are my faith, my family, others, and business. Those 4 pillars are what I guide my life by. It doesn't mean they're all aligned all the time. Some days my business pillar might be a little upside down. My others pillar, I might be not giving enough as a servant leader and a servant human. And maybe my family one's a little out of line. But I'm always toggling and understanding where I am on my pillars. So when adversity comes, I live between my faith, my family, others, and business. And when I have those 4 pillars, everything else is insignificant. I block it out. I live within those lanes. People say, how do you do everything you do? Because I'm very efficient, because I live within these pillars. Nothing else, if they don't fall in these pillars, is significant in my life. I block it out. And my North Star is just to try to be the best human I can be. And to me, that's trying to help others along the journey and also learn from others. Like, I believe we can learn from everybody. Our neighbors, Sabrina, know more than we do in some area. Maybe they play the guitar, we don't. Maybe they've gone to Italy and they tell us about Venice. We haven't been. So I think leaders have to have a learner's mindset, and individuals have to have a learner's mindset. That's when I'm personally most stimulated, when I'm grabbing a nugget from someone and learning something. But I believe pillars are really important. And what is your North Star? And every year in my life, I work harder at that North Star to try to give better, to try to give back, to try to have a great conversation. And it doesn't have to be big things, right? We think, oh, well, we don't have this or we don't have that. Holding a door open, having a conversation with a stranger, doing little things that are random acts of kindness. So that's how I kind of run my life. And those pillars allow me to understand, am I balanced in what I'm doing? Am I stopping for others? Am I doing something for others? Am I spending the time with my family? And your last question about faith. I write about faith in the Summit Mindset, and I'll tell you a quick story. I wrote this book with James C. Moore, a New York Times bestselling author, and great guy. We became great friends. I really admire him. He's like, faith's going to be a tough one. And I said, I know. But I wanted to write about faith that an atheist could read about faith, that I didn't want to be judgmental in any way. But I know that days that you may be in Italy or I may be in the mountains and we walk out in the backyard and we see the stars, we kind of stop and go, wow, there's something greater here than us. We're not that significant. And I believe faith is super important. And it's kind of like when people don't work out and they go, I don't really like working out. I'm uncomfortable with it. Well, if you're not seeking your faith, you're uncomfortable with it as well. So I just want people to pause and think about something greater than themselves. Because in my life, faith has guided me through many adversities, many ups and downs, and I'm sure there'll be more in life. That's just living. And I think when we have that anchor and we have a belief bigger than ourselves, we're also better humans along the journey.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. So much of success, everybody wants to know, like, what's your secret? What is it that you do? And it's not one thing. There's so many things that come together. And when you do make it, it's like your book, you get to the summit and you almost just have a grateful heart to be like, I don't even know sometimes how I got through that, but like it's a grace that was over your life. You talked about the adversity, you had stage 4 ulcerative colitis, and that was a moment in your life where you had an adversity personally. If you can talk about this, because a lot of people think that when a tragedy hits them, it's over, but this is when you were 32.
Yeah.
And then after, look at what you've done from 32 to now. If you can just speak to that for people to hear, like, it's never over unless you decide it's over.
Yeah, yeah, I love it. Adversity has happened in every decade of my life. When I look back at my life, I'm 60 years old today. And at a young age in my 20s, I lost my dad. He sat on his deathbed and he looked at me and said, I'm sorry. And I said, sorry for what? He goes, I'm sorry I didn't try harder. And that seared right through me. And he died at 50 years old in 2 months. That generation, they were big smokers. And that was an intersection in my life that, his weakness will become my strength. I'll try harder. And by the age of 32, my life was really clicking. I became a young VP at 32. I was doing really well. I was raising a family. And I was flying home from Chicago, doubled over in pain in the back of a plane, landed bleeding terribly, and went to the emergency room. And they said, we think you could have stage 4 stomach cancer. And of course, more tests were run, and I ended up with stage 4 ulcerative colitis. And for 14 years, I battled on the highest dosage drug allowed by the FDA, which is a drug called Asacol, to hold on to my colon and not lose it by raising a family and continuing my career. And look, I never feel sorry for myself. It's just part of living. It's part of the experience. And those things is where my greatest learnings have come through struggle. And knowing that we all have to be resilient because there's no really other option. And we can still move forward in life. And at the age of 40, I started to get into remission. I started to get better. I started to live a much better diet, a cleaner lifestyle to try to control that. And today I've lived, on a Mediterranean diet my entire life, my adult life, and living super clean. And I'm a runner every morning and trying to learn from those experiences, knowing that life will happen to me again, like it'll happen to you and to the listeners here today. But through that adversity, if we can get better along the journey, we grow both, internally, and we can share with other people. So those are always tough experiences. I talked to you about this summer, which was incredibly difficult to me, losing someone at the wheel, in a car, very hard. And that is a summit mindset that is life. And people sometimes you hear say, well, it's not fair. Of course it's not fair, but that's living. It's not meant to be fair. It's how we have good fundamentals and how we grow from the experiences and how we can help others along the journey. I really believe that's what this is all about. It's about us, you and I, sharing today so we can help some listeners. And also letting people know, just because you achieve something in life doesn't make you better. It doesn't make you more significant. And it doesn't change anything. We're just humans. And we're all vulnerable, and we all go through adversity. And I believe when we can share our vulnerability, I believe that's also a strength because we can connect with each other. And that's just reality of living.
Yeah, I would love to ask you a question about vulnerability, especially for a lot of people that, a big thing right now is women in business, and just making sure that, for me, I wish there were more women in leadership. I don't see a lot, but at the same time too, I do come from an earn it mentality where, you do have to have the skills, and I've learned a lot to be able to get into leadership. My personal journey with being vulnerable is, and I just say this to be so honest, it gets very scary for me to ever think about being vulnerable in business. Do you think that there's a double standard when it comes to, like, when a man is vulnerable, it's like that's a sign of strength, but when a woman is vulnerable, it's displaying weakness? What are your thoughts about that?
Great question. I don't think men are vulnerable enough. I think,
Okay.
they have this kind of attitude that we need to be macho and we need to hold this kind of up this way. By the way, I'm a big, big believer and supporter of women. On my senior team, I've had tons of women, and I believe women are wonderful. Even at Yes, they're a little business. I think we have a balance of male and female. And I'm a big believer about that. I talk about it all the time because I believe, women give a different optic, a different viewpoint than a man. And I think that ability to synthesize those both together makes a great team. I would say from a woman's standpoint, I always say be a valuable voice. You're there to contribute, you're there to make a difference, and don't conform to what you think a standard should have been. I always say it's no longer 1950, right? 1950 management was pound on the desk and it was more male driven. And I encourage women and men to be a valuable voice and to make a difference. We all put a lot of hours into work, 12, 16 hours a day, and we are there to contribute for the organization, but we're there actually to contribute for ourselves too. So I encourage women to stand up for themselves and contribute for themselves and contribute to the organization, just like I do men. I believe that often people have said to me in my career, wow, Scott, you're so vulnerable. You share so much. Do you see that as weakness? No, I kind of chuckle and say it's a real strength because I want people around me to know that we're all going through it together. And if we can galvanize as a team and understand that, we're better teammates, we're a better organization, and we're better individuals. And at the end of the day, what I want women on this podcast to hear and men to hear, the greatest asset you'll ever own is not your title, is not your job, and quite frankly, it's not even your family. The greatest asset you'll ever own is you. And we often neglect the you because we're worried about what people are going to think. We're worried about what people are going to say, and we're serving our family and doing everything. But the greatest asset is you, and the greatest challenge is you versus you. So we all own that individually, and I just encourage people to step forward with that in a very positive manner.
Yeah, and I think we do need to learn again how to have debates and how to have healthy disagreements, because we're in a society today where, like, if you don't agree with me, I'm going to cancel you, I'm going to discard you. This mentality, it's very, very lethal. And it creates a toxic environment for a lot of people where they feel like, can I say something, or what's going to happen to me if I do voice my opinion? You give a great example in the book about the 2-gallon water box that, as a team and with Essentia, you wanted to innovate, but then you said in that section in the book, it was through discussion, debate, and a feedback of ideas. Can you talk about that today for people in business? A lot of people run their teams on agendas. I see this so much, and it really grosses me out because it's like, well, why are we here then? Why don't you just roll out and steamroll what it is that you want to do? You actually don't want a discussion. You actually don't want a debate. How essential was that for you to roll out this new concept and to innovate within your company so you could stay alive and then be acquired?
Yeah, I mean, mission critical. It first starts with what kind of culture are you building, right? Are you building a culture where everybody has a valuable voice? And when you say those words, hey, Sabrina, you have a valuable voice, I want to listen to you. I want to hear your feedback. And to your earlier point, I may give you feedback that doesn't agree, but that's okay, because maybe there was a nugget in our debate that I learned from you. And I think all leaders have to be learners. So it starts with the culture you're going to set up. And at Nestle, with 22 people, we've set up a culture. Let's debate, let's talk, let's empower each other, let's have feedback. So at Essentia, when I went into Essentia with Ken Uptain, the founder, I'd been the founder for 22 years, a great visionary. I said, we have to together create these pillars, create this culture, and then allow people to talk and have a valuable voice. So when we got to that point, we had already laid the groundwork for our pillars, and people first, and people matter, and their voice matters. And we started these discussions, and it was no longer about silos between sales, marketing, and finance. It was about solutions and how we drive those together. And as teammates started to see that we're all driving solutions and everyone's valuable voice was helping that, it allowed us to what I always talk about, smart action. Hey, if the action's smart action, it's not about my agenda or your agenda, it's about advancing our business. And if we start to do that authentically, we select the things that matter to advance our business. When we don't do that, to your earlier point, it's just people's agendas and they don't want to hear our voice. And those aren't cultures. Those are things that are agenda driven, that are top down driven. And then what happens is people just start punching the clock. They check in and check out. They're like, this is BS. It doesn't matter what I say. They're going to do what they want anyway. To me, that is a recipe for disaster. I want to hear from folks. I want to learn from folks. And then I want people to get really jazzed up about doing something different, like a 2-gallon box, doing something different as a culture, giving back to the community, doing something different in COVID, and go home at the end of the week and say, I love where I work because I personally can make a difference. And we're doing that at Nestle, this little company, Nestle, with 22 people. We talk about it every week. Again, habits and behaviors have to be lived in an organization, not a plaque on the wall.
Yeah, because a lot of people, they say people first, but they're really profits first.
Yeah.
You know, and they really are, because their actions, they support everything that's driving more profits at the expense of people. And I think it's both. You know, I don't think that a company that is not profitable is not a healthy company. So what do you read? Who do you go to keep yourself in check, so you don't always feel like you have all the answers? Like, what do you do to constantly grow yourself?
I love to read. I read, every day, whether I'm reading a magazine or reading a book. I just finished Ego's the Enemy by Ryan Holiday, a great little read, just a couple hundred pages. So I'm always looking for knowledge. I love Success Magazine because it's all entrepreneurs, right? They talk about their journey, really early on, and what they've done and how they've managed through chaos and got to the other side. And what I'll also do is I'll take little notes, little paragraphs, and I'll underline them. And I'll send them out at Nestle on a Teams chat and say, hey, here's something to think about. Here's what I just read. What I learned in organizations, not everybody's going to read the book. They're going to shelf the book, but everybody will read a few sentences in their busy day. And maybe they'll start to take something from that. So what happens then? What am I doing once again? I'm creating a learning culture. I'm creating a we culture. I'm sharing knowledge. And people start sharing it back with us, right? So that's wonderful. I've done things where I've bought 100 books and given them out to the organization if I like something I'm reading. But I love this strategy of just underlining a couple of sentences on something I'm reading, taking a picture and sending it out to the team. It's a moment of reflection. And then what you'll get on a town hall or a staff meeting, hey, Scott, I love what you sent out about, how to build culture in teams, how we all have to be one together, how we have to listen to each other's voice. I love that little read you sent out. What I found is a few sentences, people always stop and read it quickly in the busyness of their day. But what I've also found is that starts to build a culture of learning and sharing knowledge, right? And it starts to become a behavior. So that's why I come back to behaviors. Organizations have good behaviors and bad behaviors, and we all have them both, but you want to close the gap on those bad and start doing things that really create a cadence of doing the reps on good behaviors. And I think when I speak to people individually, young folks, people in the middle or older folks, it's never too late to start a new habit or behavior. And the ultimate goal, like, Scott, what's the magic? There's really no magic. The magic's practice like you play. And the other magic is one word: consistency in business and life.
Yeah. I think the passing of your father and reading the book and hearing you speak, it was a major time in your life that you draw on. And I loved what you said about, you had to take something that, it's almost like we as children, we want to fulfill the missions of our parents. And I think, like, that's important for every parent to understand. No child wants to disappoint their parents. So I think that's a beautiful thing. When you look at what your father said, and he said, and he feels like he failed, what would you say is the role of victimhood in today's world? And then this relates to kind of, what you rest yourself on, you versus you. Because if you can get into this mindset of, this is me versus me, every day I have to get a little bit better. And if things happen to me, I'm not going to allow for a victim mentality to overtake me. Because for my parents, they were immigrants. They came to this country with nothing, and they had more hardships than me. But one of the things I always remind myself is, like, I just don't want to have a victim mentality. Can you speak about that relative to the you versus you kind of mantra that you have?
Yeah, it's a great, great topic. I think that it's about personal accountability. And I think
Yes.
we all go through things in life when we come from different social and economic backgrounds. And certainly things are harder from some than others. That's life. But when you have personal accountability and you kind of have a mindset of chop tree, carry water, you're always going to work to get better. I mean, today I'm 60 years old and I know that at 61, I'll be better because I'm always working on my personal accountability. And as I started this conversation, it's an inside out job. And I always ask myself, like, what do I suck at? What did I do bad this week? Did I not listen to Sabrina when she's talking? Did I interrupt her? Did I answer her question fully? That's how dialed in I am to my personal accountability in my experience to continue to grow. I want to be better every year of my life. I wasn't this guy at 30 years old, right? I was a 30-year-old, right? So when we take that personal accountability, we have a mindset of never stop evolving. And that is really the you versus you. It's about never stopping to evolve. And it's having a learner's mindset. And that doesn't mean it has to be learning something big. I think often in life, people feel things have to be grandiose. If you want to learn how to be a great cook, go take some cooking classes. If you want to learn how to ride a horse, go horseback riding. Back to my earlier conversation, I encourage everyone to do things that set their soul on fire. This conversation with you, I love that sets my soul on fire. Being personally accountable sets my soul on fire. And it's not about perfection. It's just about having a mindset that you always want to keep evolving and be growth minded. I think when we're single minded, we never grow. We never grow just in our own thoughts. We grow by seeking knowledge. And we grow by doing that in many different ways. So podcasting today is such a big art, right? There's so many opportunities to learn quickly, reading and from friends. And really, we also grow by being a good listener.
Yeah. That this is very powerful. I just want to say thank you so much for your time. I know that you have so much going on, and just you taking this moment in time to just sit down with the audience and even writing this book, it is a really big deal when someone takes the time to take all of their wisdom and knowledge and then put it in, condensed version for us to download into ourselves. It's a beautiful thing. I would like to ask you one final question that I ask guests that I feel are rare. And I think you are a rare person because, when you look at someone who is just looking at the whole, that is rare because some people are so single-minded. They're so on one track that they just ruin everything else. And I don't think that's the point of living on Earth. But I'm still figuring it out too.
We
So
all are.
what would you say is the thing that the world will miss the most when you are not here anymore? What is the one thing that Scott Miller brought to the world that no one else did better than you?
Oh, I don't know if no one else did better to me. I think that Scott Miller hopefully, inspired some people to look within themselves, to know that they're worthy of making their own life better, and maybe made a little dent in the universe.
Yeah, and I think the beauty of what you've done is you've showed that you can be very successful and still be mindful and conscious of everything else around you. Like for you to talk about faith, for you to talk about happiness, for you to talk about just the things and caring about other people, because these often are things that are at the sacrifice of success. And so
Yeah.
I just want to say thank you for being a person who has demonstrated that it is possible. And
Well,
where can people find you if they want to hear more, if they want to learn from you? Do you do business consulting?
yeah, I'm actually, they can find us on the Summit Mindset, the book. It's an Instagram we've just started. They can also find us on the Summit Mindset website. I'm also working with Two Market Media, doing some business consulting as well, starting some personal coaching in that area. And they can find me also on a little Instagram I have, Scott Miller, you versus you. So just something small, DM me there. But I love helping folks in business and life. And I think it's a journey for all of us. And we're all on this journey together. And I think if we all have humility along the way and we're growth minded, we just keep getting better together ultimately. And I think no one makes it alone. So I'd encourage all of your listeners to have the courage to ask for help, to seek knowledge, and create a community. And it's great that we're all different individuals. And I don't think people should think of themselves fitting into any box but their own box, and be their authentic self, right? I think the most important thing we can do is be our authentic self. And that's actually when we become the most comfortable with who we are.
Yeah. And I do think that takes time, when
Sure.
we're figuring out a lot as we evolve. And
Yeah.
I think that's why it's so great to hear from people that have been playing the game for decades, because
Mm.
you're going to have a lot more experience and wisdom. And it's beautiful to hear that in your book.
Yeah. Well, thank you for your time. Your questions were outstanding. I loved having this little fireside chat with you, and I hope we can stay in touch.
Okay, awesome. Thank you, everyone.